Welcome to The Growth Factor, a broadcast ministry of St. Mark Baptist Church. Today, as part of our family, you will experience the life-changing and spirit-nurturing Word of God. Please enjoy this time with us, where we're committed to helping you grow in knowledge, grow in faith, and grow in God. St. Mark Baptist Church, you grow here.
Well, welcome back to the Growth Factor podcast, a broadcast ministry of the St. Mark Baptist Church here in Little Rock, Arkansas. My name is Pastor John. I am the Connections Pastor here at St. Mark, and I'm joined by our Senior Pastor, Dr. Philip L. Pointer, Sr., as this is the Growth Factor. And this season, we are really getting into it, diving into the book of Exodus as we talk about what it means to traverse deep waters and deliverance and duty. What is our deliverance, and then what it is that is our duty as a result of that deliverance. So this episode, we're going to talk about making bricks without straws. You don't want to miss this one because we're talking about oppression in the Christian experience, and you don't want to miss it. Pastor Pointer. Now, last time we helped people get in some good trouble. So we took them up on the mountain.
Yeah.
Last episode, last go round. Well, this time we're going to slide in a little bit of a valley and talk about oppression and the Christian experience in light of what happens in the book of Exodus. Now, we've just recorded and talked about the call of Moses and how that call comes with questions, and how Moses gets support from his brother, Aaron. And so now Moses and Aaron now go to deliver the news to God's people, starting at the end of chapter number 4. And they meet the elders of Israel and they give them some good news. Yeah. Hey, we're coming to announce to Pharaoh to let our people go. And I'm sure they were excited at that point. Yeah. When they understand that, man, God's answered our prayer. He got Mo, and he got Aaron coming through to say, help us get out of this situation. But it doesn't unfold the way you would think if you have these two figures coming by God's direction to tell folks, hey, it's time for us to go. And God gave us a message to Pharaoh.
Yeah. So here's the thing, man. The promise of freedom is wonderful, but the process of freedom can be excruciating and frustrating and can cause you to doubt the promise of freedom. And that's what happens. That's what happens here in this portion of the book of Exodus. The people are, initially like, woo, finally, 400 years, let's go, let's roll. And then it's like, no, not yet. It's like, wait, slow down, Doc, slow down. Wait. Right. You mean we're not ready to go right now? Yeah. I mean, they've been crying out to God. We read that in chapter 3. They've cried out to God. God said, I've heard their cry. I have come down. God says, I have come down to deliver them. And Moses, I'm sending you. Moses is reluctant and reticent. And then he says, all right, I'm going to give you Aaron. So now you got two God-called, God-sent spokesman. There you go. Yeah. And the great deliverer, and we'll learn later in Exodus, Aaron is going to become the high priest. And you got they got major calls of God on their lives. And yet, with all of that, what we would call anointing and assignment and all of that stuff, it's still a process. And it is not an easy one or a quick one. In fact, things actually get worse. Yeah.
Before they get better. And that's what we see in the chapter number 4, verse 31. The people believed everything that Moses and Aaron told them. And when they heard that the Lord had paid attention to them and that he had seen their misery, they knelt low and worshiped. Yeah. Ooh, what a way to end a chapter. But oh boy. Yeah. Once we dive into chapter number 5. Chapter number 5 begins with Moses and Aaron coming straight to Pharaoh and demanding their freedom. Verse number 1. Later, Moses and Aaron went in and said to Pharaoh, this is what the Lord said, what the Lord, the God of Israel says. Let my people go so that they may hold a festival for me in the wilderness. And then look at Pharaoh's response. who is the Lord that I should obey him by letting Israel go? I don't know the Lord. And besides, I will not let Israel go. So first of all, he says, I don't even know this God.
Yeah.
We got so many gods. Who is this one? Because I ain't never heard of this one. And then he says that your bondage is too important for me to let you go.
Yeah. It is a spiritual and social reality that power concedes nothing unless a demand is placed upon it. People who are benefited by oppressive systems don't want those systems to go away. And certainly Satan, who is the eternal enemy of our souls, certainly does not relent freedom. He doesn't want you to hear and understand the gospel. He doesn't want you as a person who is an unbeliever to understand the good news. The Bible says that the God of this world blinds the minds of those who are unbelieving, nor does he want the believer to grasp all of the implications of the gospel. Because if he cannot keep you from going to heaven, he wants to keep you joyless and ineffective while you're on earth. And so that's a reality that is both social and spiritual, and we see it historically in so many different ways. And we're going to see it in Exodus chapter 5, and we're going to see it how it has played out in history in our nation and continues to play out in our spiritual experience as well.
So, and each one of these sessions, we kind of look at a text that serves as kind of the shift text in the entire text before we go into detail on the contents itself. And I think the text here in this particular chapter is verse number 7, where Pharaoh now talks to these foremen, that's what we'll talk about here in just a minute, and says to them, you shall no longer give the people straw to make bricks. This is in verse number 7. Don't continue to supply the people with straw for making bricks as before. They must go and gather straw for themselves. So now they are required to make bricks without straws. Now, in this culture, straw served a very important purpose, and it was to bind this clay. So the bricks are made from this clay molding that the straw was added to and mixed to make these bricks. So all of y'all who go to Egypt and you on IG posting all these pyramids, these were actually made in history by a group of people who were slaves. And it's amazing to see that without cranes and without other devices, that these folks were able to put together these magnificent edifices that people still go to see to this day and still marvel at them. Like, I know we're able to build large buildings, the Sears Tower in Chicago, like other large buildings, but they did this just with their bare hands and without any help. And he made it worse on them here.
Yeah, the historical and archaeological marvel that are these monuments in Egypt. I mean, the precision and there's all kinds of details about how precise and accurate and almost perfect these buildings are in terms of their alignment and how they align with the stars and all of those things. The engineering marvel is incredible, but the process of making them was an excruciating experience of oppression for those who actually had to make them. Among them, at this point in history of our text, it's going to be Israel in Egypt, and that straw, like rebar in concrete. It's to hold it together, and the idea is, it was there, it was available, and now he's saying you have to go get it for yourself. You have to be even more complicit in your own oppression by having to go get a basic necessity to hold together this work that doesn't even benefit you in any way.
Yeah. And we've been talking about both spiritual and the social realities of text, and also looking comparatively at the African American experience in the United States. And I mean, there's such a clear comparison here when you talk about this bricks without straw comparison, because in 1793, there was an invention that came to pass that actually moved our nation away from two other crops to cotton, and that it was the cotton gin.
Yeah.
Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin that was made to separate the seeds from the cotton, which meant that the enslaved people who were picking the cotton had to increase productivity as a result of this new invention because of the economic windfall that came from being able to produce more cotton and to be able to become an industry in the United States.
Yeah, that textile shift, so the cash crops initially were rice and tobacco, especially in the Carolinas. Tobacco was a major cash crop, but the cotton gin enabled the cotton to be processed from its raw state to a usable state more quickly, and as such, the need for cotton for an amount to keep that process going increased exponentially. That's why the typical historical picture of enslaved people is of them picking cotton. And some of our foreparents and some of you, our senior saints, even grew up in perhaps sharecropping kind of experiences where you had to chop cotton.
Yeah.
And so that's not so far back. You talk about 1793, the invention of cotton gin, but its ramifications and impact hit the lives of some people who are with us right now, who are watching right now. They can put in the comments that they too grew up chopping cotton because of the long-reaching effects of that kind of oppression.
Yeah, and it not only had economic consequences, like there were demographic shifts that occurred because of this. Because in 1793, there were 650,000, around that amount, of enslaved people here in the U.S. After the cotton gin was invented, obviously they're going to need more laborers, quote unquote. So in many instances where breeding occurred, in order to make sure that there were more enslaved people to do more work. So ultimately, by 1850, you go from 650,000 people to 3.2 million enslaved people in the U.S. And 1.8 million of them cultivated cotton alone. So they knew what they were doing. They wanted to increase the workforce by forcing slaves upon one another.
And it is not just an economic issue. The economic issue of enriching yourself on the back of another person's labor is one side, but then the inevitable traumatic response to being forced to labor without any personal benefit creates, and that forced breeding created individual trauma and then family trauma and dysfunction that affects African American descendants of enslaved people today. So that they've proven scientifically, we talked about this in other episodes in past seasons, that they've proven that trauma is passed down in DNA, that you can inherit trauma from your parents. And so if you have an ancestor that was an enslaved person, there's DNA, there's something in you that causes you to be born traumatized. Additionally, the social factors of breeding and selective breeding, like you would do with cattle or people do with dogs and those kinds of things, that creates polyamorous understandings of how relationship works. So rather than a husband and a wife and raising their children, a man was valued for his ability to produce strong children with multiple women. That prevents him from being a father. It also prevents him from, because he cannot provide for his children. The children don't know their dad, that kind of thing. Then that man and that woman have a physical relationship that does not have the type of depth and communication and affection that goes beyond just making a baby. That's the original baby mama, baby daddy culture. You get beyond that, you then see the intentional sowing of seeds within the minds of black women who are enslaved, to say that the man who made the baby ain't worth anything. And so the man sees his worth in making children. The woman is then told he's not worth anything because he can't help you with these children. And so you create this lasting tension and mistrust between enslaved persons who want to have these marital or romantic relationships, and that lives with us to this day.
Yeah.
All because cotton was making a lot of money.
So it wasn't just economic; it was social, and really was traumatizing,
relational, and then spiritual.
Yeah. So what we do find, though, is that over 2/3 of the world's exports of cotton at this time, you got to think the U.S. is still colonizing, quote unquote. So it's not the United States that we come to know, but 2/3 of the world's export of cotton is coming from that East Coast area in the United States
and those southern states. Yeah.
So when we think about the economic drivers of this country, like there are people who believe, steel is what built America, and the truth of the matter is, the one thing that built our society economically was cotton, and was driven by enslaved people. So when y'all out there talk about reparations and we don't need no reparations, we built this country on the labor of our backs, literally. And to ignore that reality is to ignore the wealth building idea that cotton was. Cotton was wealth.
Yes.
In the United States, which led to land ownership and other wealth building mechanisms. And for us to be the people who actually drove that economy, and now people are saying that we have to be able to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps.
Right.
When we've been bootstrapping the whole time in the 1800s, there has to be some cognitive dissonance there for people to say that black folks were not involved in that process when we were the wealth in this country.
And beyond that, the lasting social ramifications, the ongoing social and relational and economic ramifications of those kinds of things cannot be disputed, cannot be denied, and to do so is to be intellectually and spiritually dishonest. We'll get it in Exodus in a moment, but one of the things that happens in Exodus, and one of the principles of the Bible, is that you don't send out a person who had been enslaved without compensating them for their labor.
That's it.
And so that becomes one of the ongoing realities of economic inequity that happens in our land even today. With the prison system, where essentially it's a new slavery. Michelle Alexander's work, The New Jim Crow, speaks about the prison system as the new slavery, enabling people to force labor without adequate, sufficient compensation. These are offenses, not just to the social and economic reality, but they are offenses to Scripture and the Bible. And these are areas where we have to bring the Bible to bear in the discussion of how persons who are even incarcerated are remunerated for the labor they offer.
And it's normalized.
Yeah.
I mean, during the pandemic, I'm sitting listening to a city commission meeting, and there's one commissioner, a white gentleman, who says, man, I just can't wait until we can get those prisoners back out there to dig these ditches. And he says this live on camera because it's normalized, because that's free labor for us, so that we don't have to budget for it.
Yes.
Because we could just take them out of prison and put them out there to, quote unquote, dig these ditches.
Yeah. And this again is bricks without straw. This is the ongoing experience of that. As it happened biblically, so it has happened historically, and it is still happening socially in other experiences. It even underpaying a person for their labor. is a part of this inequity.
Yeah, and we've seen that historically, right? You talked about sharecropping. Some of our Golden Saints may remember. They worked day and night to lease, tenant lease properties for them to be able to get just enough to get by at the end of the month. So they're always working from behind. This is the way that many Southern plantation owners were able to retain enslaved people without calling them enslaved people.
Yeah.
Tell me you got slaves without telling me you got
right,
slaves.
Exactly. Yeah. And the idea is paying that low wage that creates a need for public assistance if it's available. It is again, this is offending. This is an offense to God. This is an offense to God, and that's what's happening. Listen to me carefully. If you are on the side of unfair wages or inequity in wages, whether that's racial, whether that's paying a woman less than you pay a man, whatever that looks like, if you are on that side, you are siding with Pharaoh in this text, not with the God who wants to deliver. Yeah.
That's tough.
Yeah.
That's tough. But you mentioned the history of just labor activism in the U.S. because there are people who have been underpaid following Reconstruction, during Jim Crow, during the Civil Rights era. What we've seen is that there was a lot of labor activism around those issues. One of the first was a group of women in Atlanta who were laundromat workers in 1881. And that group of women were able to mobilize folks during Reconstruction, and they were able to get better wages for themselves as black women. And the first organizers post-Civil War was black women.
Yeah.
Ain't that always the case?
It did always.
Black women be curness.
right.
So what we also saw was the March on Washington, and people stopped there.
Right. It wasn't just
the
the March on Washington. No. March on Washington for jobs.
Social.
Freedom. Yeah.
Martin Luther King was a social justice.
I Have a Dream was for jobs. That's what it was about. About jobs.
He said,
equal wages.
I come here to collect the debt.
Yep.
On that check that y'all wrote in the Constitution. And I need to collect that debt.
Yeah.
We don't talk about that.
No, they don't like
that. They want
to
talk about kumbaya and getting on the mountaintop. But,
nonviolence.
But King came for a March on Washington for jobs.
Yep.
And that's one of the reasons why he was 2 hours away in Memphis the night before he died with his famous mountaintop speech. He's there not to preach. He's there to actually support the Memphis sanitation workers strike where 2 men were crushed in the back of a truck, and they didn't have they weren't able to unionize, didn't have the benefits that other white workers had, and they were striking. That's where you see those famous "I Am a Man" posters. Those iconic images that we see, and King was there to support this group of people, and he gets assassinated there because he's stirring up good trouble.
Yeah. And it is the pattern, and I want to make sure we grab how this is Exodus coming forward. It is the pattern of oppressive regimes and systems to intensify the oppression, to angrily respond to cries for freedom rather than to relent and to say, no, you got it. Okay, you're right, I'm wrong. That's not what oppressive systems and spirits and their earthly representatives do. They intensify the oppression, and that's the bricks without straw. That's what you see whenever there seems to be any social progress. There seems to be a violent response to social progress, and that is on par with what we see with the spirit of Pharaoh in this passage and throughout history today.
Yeah. So how is it, now that we've provided that historical context around bricks and straw, not just for the Israelites, but for God's people throughout time, how is it that we find God's faithfulness in the midst of bricks and straws? We see it here in the text in several different ways, but I want to start here in verse number 1 because it's going to demonstrate to us that we see the people of God enslaved, but we also see that they still belong to God.
Yeah.
In verse 1. It says, later Moses and Aaron went in and said to Pharaoh, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel says, let my people go, so they may hold a festival for me in the wilderness. So what this text tells us is that the Israelites are God's people, even though they're oppressed,
right?
Even though they're in these circumstances, God clearly distinguishes them and says, these are my people, and I need you to let them go.
The key to understanding the whole experience of the Exodus is that personal possessive pronoun, my. My. God claims and owns and pulls. God then identifies God's self with those people who are dealing with the most extreme and difficult and excruciating experiences of oppression. They belong to me is God's thing. So I've picked them. I've chosen them. I want them. They're mine. It is a wonderful reminder that we do not belong to our circumstances, our troubles. We are not identified by that. We're not identified by the things we go through. We are identified by the God who claims us as God's own. You know, and that personal possessive pronoun is so important to remind yourself. And, you know, I want people to be careful about affirmations and things like that. Yeah. But one thing that you can affirm consistently and should affirm consistently is God calls me his, or God calls me mine. You know what I mean? That kind of understanding and grasp of God's sense of ownership. I possess, I own you, and not in the same way that a person owns property, but in the way that you would say, these are my children. You know what I mean? Or this is my boo. You know, that kind of thing. It's an affectionate claim, and that is what God, and I love this because God publicly through Moses and Aaron, God publicly professes his own, his sense of ownership of the people of God. It's like he does with Jesus in the baptism experience in the Gospels. When Jesus comes up out of the water, before a miracle is worked, before water to wine and walking on water, he says, this is my beloved son, in whom I'm well pleased. In fact, Pastor John, I just want to run a New Testament passage just comes to my heart here in 1 Peter chapter 2. And just a quick reminder about this. And I like the old King James translates it a certain way that makes people misunderstand the passage. So I want to read it to you in the CSB so that you get it. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation. Old King James says a peculiar people, and we think that means, I'm strange. I'm supposed to be strange. No, the proper translation that CSB and others, a people for his possession, or some translations say a people he purchased, a purchased people, so that you may proclaim the praises of the one who has called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. That passage is that's something to do an affirmation about. Chosen and holy and a these are my people.
Those are worthy affirmations.
Yeah, worthy affirmations. I like that.
I think this is God's TikTok moment. You know that meme. It's like, I don't play about this one here. This is his moment, saying, listen, I don't play about those folks. Yeah. Those are my people, because what it ultimately leads to is that God's election is always accompanied by God's protection. That when God says that this one is mine, and we see that in the life of Jesus, that when he affirms him immediately, he goes out into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. The Spirit drives him there.
Yep, exactly.
Yet God's protection is still there with him in the wilderness. And it's to serve as an example for us that when God says that you're his, that you're his, that he's going to protect you, that he's going to cover you. Now, obviously, there are things that are going to come along in our lives where we are oppressed, but God's going to be able to protect us in a way that demonstrates to us that we are still loved in the midst of that.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, it's in that moment that I've got to do that hard thing, which is to try not to interpret my God through the lens of my circumstance, but to interpret my circumstance through the lens of who my God is. So that I'm not trying to figure out God based on what's happening. I'm trying to understand what's happening based on who God is.
That's good.
And that, so that it's painful and it hurts and I don't like it. And God, I wish this would hurry up and get over with. And you say you're going to deliver me, but now it's getting worse. I got bricks without straw happening in my life. And I got to see that God must be up to something. God must be doing something. And we'll see that God is really after Pharaoh. He's really proving something through your life, as much as he's doing something in your life. But knowing your God's own purchased possession helps you to manage those seasons that are so trying and difficult.
Yeah. So we see that God's people are enslaved, but they belong to God still. Also in this text, what we're going to find is that the people actually make a reasonable request.
Yeah. You can't fault them. You can't fault them.
They were only requesting, as we see in verse number 3, after he says, "Who is your God?" and I don't know him. They only actually request to worship him. In verse number 3, they answer him, "The God of the Hebrews has met with us. Please let us go on a 3-day trip into the wilderness so that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God, or else he may strike us with plague or sword." So they wanted to go to sacrifice in the wilderness because animals were sacred to the Egyptians. This is why it's important for you to understand, as we talked last season, to understand the context, because they're in a context where animals are actually worshipped across the board. We're going to see this later in our sessions. So they're actually saying, hey, it's reasonable for us, for y'all not to see what we about to do to them.
Yeah, so Egyptians held animals in higher esteem than they did many people groups.
Yeah,
we see that some places too, in our kind of inside out culture, where people are more in love with their animal than they are with other people.
Our dog folks just done left. They done left the chat.
I wasn't talking about. I didn't call no species of animal. I just said some people do that kind of stuff. They have them on airplanes and stuff. Anyway, the point I'm making is, church, that Egyptians perceived animals to be these, they worship them. And so the Hebrews have a history of animal sacrifice that comes all the way back from Papa Adam and Mama Eve. The first thing that God does is take animal skins and cover them after the fall of humankind through their disobedience. We see Abel offering animals to God in Genesis chapter 4. That's why Cain doesn't like him, because his offering is received. We see it. Moses gets, Noah gets out of the ark, and first thing he does is build an altar and sacrifice animals. So it's a long-standing. The ram in the bush in Genesis 22. Abraham, instead of offering his son, God sends him a ram as a replacement, as a substitute. So we see this long history of animal sacrifice as the Hebrews. And what we come to understand is that they have not been able, as it were, because of their enslavement, to worship God in the way that they know to worship God, which is to sacrifice.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, that's a good little thing. That's a little preaching point right here, Pastor John, because the thing about it is, you haven't worshipped if you haven't sacrificed anything. My God, have mercy here. And but that's the cultural rub they have as enslaved people. They're not free to express themselves to God in a major way. And so they say, hey, look, God said, let my people go into the wilderness, give me 3 days, let us sacrifice. Now, here's one of the sticky points about the text interpretively. What would have happened if Pharaoh said, okay, cool.
Right. Yeah.
You can go for 3 days. Was Moses lying?
We're going to keep going?
Yeah. Oh, psych. Is it like that? or what it is. I think this statement, obviously, the foreknowledge of God, and we'll talk about Pharaoh's heart being hard, and we know it's going to be a no. In fact, God had predicted to Moses the no in the first place. But that cultural rub is what creates an ongoing tension that is going to then result in these plagues that are going to happen in the next little piece of our study.
Yeah. And that's the crazy part for me is that they're making this reasonable request, yet he pushes back on that. And it seems like sometimes, especially when you think about contemporary culture, or you think about the history of the U.S., that sometimes our reasonable requests make others think that they need to sacrifice what they consider sacred.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When you think about the history and tradition of our activism, the stuff we asking for is reasonable.
Regular stuff.
I just want a regular class with regular books for my kids.
Yeah.
And Brown versus Board of Education comes up, and we have to litigate to get equal access for human beings created in the image of God that you think humans are created in, but because they're black and brown, you treat them differently, and now we got to go to court to get the equal access to the resources that you have that we haven't had access to.
Yeah.
Why? Because there's something sacred that you feel like you're sacrificing.
Yeah.
So the question now becomes is, what is that idol that you're saying?
Hey, here's what I'd like to do. I would just like to go vote. I'd like to cast my vote for the candidate of my choice without you trying to stand over my shoulder to intimidate me either from voting or from voting for the candidate of my choosing.
I just want to be able to pass out water.
Can I give somebody a bottle of water
if the
line is long?
And give them some food and maybe bring a DJ out somewhere and hang out with them a little bit without having some type of restrictions on where I can go.
Yeah. The simple things, those simple and reasonable requests for freedom, for liberty, for full expression of my humanity, is for some what we would call, and prayerfully not in an offensive way, a sacred cow. The idea that this thing is more important than your life, and that my money or my sense of superiority or my sense of tradition and history is more important than your life. That makes this freedom a fight rather than just a process.
So that's encouragement for you. Like, even though your request is reasonable, you best believe that there is something sacred that someone's trying to hold on to in this work of doing good trouble social activism.
And I think it can happen individually too, Pastor John. I think relationally among one another, there can be times when what you feel is a reasonable request of someone is for them an offensive and off-putting demand. You know what I mean? Just a reasonable request of basic courtesy and humanity and the truth and those kinds of things, reasonable request of honesty and relationship, those kind of things can seem like an unreasonable demand, and as such, you and I can get bogged down with, why is this so hard for you? Well, it's because of the position that individual is in that makes them feel that something is more sacred than you.
Well, Pastor P, I just need you to preach the gospel. That's what's sacred to me. Okay, I don't need all this social stuff that you're talking about. I just want you to preach the gospel.
Yeah. Well, here's the problem: the gospel is inherently social. It is spiritual and it is social. And in fact, Pastor John, I'm jumping here again, but Luke chapter 4, Jesus is going to give us his initial sermon and tell us exactly what he is here to do.
He sure is.
He's going to tell us exactly what he's here to do. In Luke chapter 4, beginning at verse 16, it says, he came to Nazareth, where he'd been brought up, and as usual, he entered the synagogue on the Sabbath, then he stood up to read. The scroll of the prophet Isaiah was given to him, and unrolling the scroll, he found the place where it was written, the Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me. To do what, Jesus? What has he anointed me to do?
Preach the gospel.
Preach the good news to the poor. That's gospel to the poor.
That's it.
He sent me to proclaim release to the captives, poor, captives, recovery of sight to the blind, to set free the oppressed. To proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. That year of the Lord's favor is the year of Jubilee. And the year of Jubilee, which was every seventh year. So 49 years. Every 49 years, the law of Moses said you released all debt and all debtors. Everybody was set free. So he's to the poor, it's economic justice. The captives, that's I'm losing my term here, Pastor John. It's justice, injustice in the courts. Recovery of sight to the blind, that's healthcare justice.
Yep.
Set free the oppressed, that's all manner of social justice.
Yep.
And then economic justice again, with acceptable year of the Lord. And y'all, this is it spiritual? Absolutely. He's talking about sin? Certainly. But what he's quoting from Isaiah has to do with the coming kingdom and how the kingdom led by the king is going to look on earth. When he then prays, we are to pray, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. There is no spiritual and social or social. It's the same. You can't have the spiritual Jesus without the social Jesus.
And I just love, like, right after that, he rolls up the scroll.
Right.
Hands it to the attendant.
Yeah.
And sits down. It's like, I done said all I got to say.
Listen.
And I ain't got to say no more.
This is what I love. Here's what it says. Verse 20. He then rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. And the eyes of everyone in the synagogue were fixed on him. Ready? He began by saying to them, today as you listen, this scripture has been fulfilled. He said, that's what I'm here to do. That's the reason. That's what I'm here to do.
Yep.
That's what I'm here to do. And it makes a lot of sense that he reads that passage as his own. Now, listen, he could have read Isaiah 53, wounded for our transgressions. He could have read, the weight of the government is going to be on his shoulders in Isaiah. There was a lot of spots in Isaiah that talk about Jesus, but he specifically went to the one of social inequity. Why, John? Because they are in a Roman oppressive system.
So good. Yeah.
And the people who are having it the worst are the ones who are the most primed for the good news.
Now some scholars think that in that culture, in that society, in the synagogues, there's a scripture reading for the day. And in God's sovereignty, Jesus happens to show up on the day.
Coincidentally.
Isaiah 61 is the passage to go to.
Yeah.
Now, some scholars believe that's just amazing to know that God says, you know what? This might be an issue for some folks.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to go with Isaiah 53. Let's go with the one that's going to set folks free. Let's set them free.
Yeah. And we don't apologize for seeing our Jesus as the great liberator, not just to take our souls to heaven, but also to give us strength to fight for equity on earth.
Yeah, on earth. Yeah, that's good. So they make this reasonable request. They get pushed back. But here's what happens after that. You see the people are met with what is an undue or increased burden here in the text.
Yeah.
So they make the request, and look at what happens with the king. The king of Egypt said to them, Moses and Aaron, why are you causing the people to neglect their work? Get to your labor. Pharaoh also said, look, the people of the land are so numerous, and you would stop them from their labor? You messing up my change. That day, Pharaoh commanded the overseers of the people as well as their foremen, don't continue to supply the people with straw for making bricks as before. They must go and gather straw for themselves, but require the same quota of bricks from them as they were making before. Do not reduce it, for they are slackers. That is why they are crying out, let us go and sacrifice to our Lord. Impose heavier work on the men, then they will be occupied with it and not pay attention to deceptive words. So you see this request resulted in an increased burden.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes as we look at texts like this, our reasonable requests are often met with unreasonable burdens. We see that pushback, but let's talk about what happens here in the text, because there's just so much here in response to their request when he says that they're so numerous and you would stop them from their labor.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that and we see this in some persons and personalities that I think are driven by spirits in the world today. People make an accusation of that which they themselves are guilty of.
Yes, sir.
So if the concern is that Moses, you are stopping them from their labor, then why are you then adding an extra step to their labor? That's you, Pharaoh, stopping them from their labor.
Yeah.
The idea is really what Pharaoh wants to do is he wants to quell any sense of hope or expectation of better, which is Satan's number one ploy. If he can get you to stop hoping for better or believing for better, he can certainly get you to stop working for it. And that is the ongoing. That is why our feeds are inundated with negativity. It's a part of satanic strategy. What's wrong everywhere. Every time you turn on news, you look at your social media feed, or God forbid you go on Twitter, it's all bad, because what the devil wants to do,
yes, sir,
is kill your hope.
If I can take that away.
If I can get their hope, I can take their energy, I can take their enthusiasm, I can take their dreams and ideas. If I can just put them, and here's the thing, sometimes we mask or Satan masks hopelessness in responsibilities. Whew. I got to make these bricks.
Yeah. Yep.
I got to make these bricks, and we pride ourselves on making the bricks. I'm getting the bricks made, so I don't have time to really pray and seek God, and I got to get these bricks made. And I don't have time for going back to school or improving myself or getting in. I got to get these bricks made. And we think, I made these bricks, not realizing that what we're building doesn't benefit anybody. These were monuments to Pharaoh's ego.
Yeah.
Not anything productive for the citizenry of Egypt, and certainly not the Israelites. And I think we are so concerned with making bricks because we find ourselves inundated with this sense of responsibility. Make sure that they have the same quota, they have the same obligations, they have the same markers to meet, not realizing that we're building monuments to nothing in that way. And the devil steals our hope in that way. The next thing you got to do, the next thing you got to do, the next thing you got to do, the next responsibility, the next obligation, the next assignment, without pausing to say, is this even what I'm best used for? Is God getting any glory out of this? You know, that kind of stuff.
Here's the one of the most frustrating things about this entire process. Sometimes it be your own people. Are we about to get in trouble?
I'm gonna walk off the set. I'm walking off the set.
What we see here in the text is that the people actually have their own participate in their oppression.
My Lord.
Look at who Pharaoh talks to. He doesn't talk directly to them. Verse number 6, it says that he commanded the overseers of the people as well as the foremen. These were Israelite foremen. Do not continue to supply bricks with straw for making bricks as before. They must go and gather straw for themselves.
Yep.
So these foremen were given the message to deliver to their own people to help in the oppression of their own people. We don't see that no more, though. We just see it here in this text because it doesn't happen anymore today.
Yeah,
we all together on this thing. Nobody in our culture participates in the oppression of our own people. It just don't happen today, P.
I'm so glad it doesn't happen. Pastor John, hypothetically speaking, if it did, one of the greatest tragedies that would be true if that were happening, but thank God it's not, is that people have a sense that acceptance by the majority culture or oppressive culture is success, even to the detriment of their own or people who are oppressed with them. It amazes me how many people think that acceptance in certain circles makes them better or is a marker of success, to the degree that they want to run from their own folks on purpose.
Correct.
Because God forbid I am identified with that group of people. And but thank God, as you said, that was hypothetical.
We don't deal with that anymore. No. But here's the crazy part. Those who participate in the oppression, if it's happened hypothetically, let's say that it's happened.
Listen, man.
Those that participate in that oppression tend to ultimately learn a valuable lesson.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because you might be black walking the halls of politics, but guess what? You still black.
Yeah. Still.
And that's what these foremen experienced here in the text. They deliver this message. The people go try to gather straw, and then production goes down.
Yep.
Surprise. Production goes down. In verse 14, then the Israelite foremen, whom Pharaoh's slave drivers had set over the people, they were beaten and asked, why haven't you finished making your prescribed number of bricks yesterday or today as you did before?
Yeah.
You know, even though you're privileged and oppressed, guess what? It's still oppression.
Still oppressed. Yeah.
You may be the foreperson. You may have a title, but guess what? You still going to experience oppression. And when it comes down to it, when you mess up with that coin, or when you mess up with whatever it is that they need you to do, you're going to have the same thing happen that these foremen had. They were beaten just like they were slaves.
Yeah.
Because that's who they were, even though they had a title.
Yeah.
The title meant nothing, very little, because they were of no social or economic value anymore.
Yeah. This is why identity has to come from verse 1 and not from verses 6 or 7 or 14.
That's good.
My identity has to come from the fact that God calls me mine. God said, these are my people. So that's my identity. Yeah. Even if I have shifting responsibilities or opportunities, because when people, the old saints would say, if man can put you up, man can put you down. And if that status is anything a person can give to you, a person can take away. But anything God gives to you, no person can take away. And these foremen learned a hard lesson in that way. We got to hurry, Pastor John, because it's getting
good, but we're getting some time. Yeah. So one of the things that we see here in the text is that these people are going to seek relief from those in power. So they actually go to the foreman. They go to the people who are overseeing them. They have the connections to the people who are in power. They know where to go. They know who to go to. They know how to get to Pharaoh. And they go straight to him and they say, in verse 15, the Israelite foreman went in and cried for help to Pharaoh.
Yeah.
Why are you treating your servants this way? No straw has been given to your servants, yet you say to us, make bricks. Look, your servants are being beaten, but it is your own people who are at fault. So they come and they talk to him.
Yeah.
So they go to reason with Pharaoh. But as they're walking these halls of power, they realize that it actually doesn't mean you have power.
Yeah.
It's not the same thing as being in power. Just because you can talk to the mayor, just because you can talk to the city council person, doesn't mean they're going to see you as an asset,
right?
In a way where you can talk to them any kind of way.
Yeah.
Now you telling me what I need to be doing.
Yeah.
That ain't your role or your position.
Yeah, and that's again, it is from a spiritual perspective, it is again recognizing our need for divine help and seeking divine approval and access to God, so that that sense of access does not always bear with it any fruit.
Yeah.
The idea that you can access people, it doesn't matter who will take your call or your email, it doesn't mean it's going to bear any fruit. And so being invited to a table where you are speaking but you're not heard makes no difference. But we do have the opportunity to appeal to a higher authority. And what these foremen did was appeal to Pharaoh rather than continue to look to God to find relief from these extreme and ridiculous burdens.
Yeah, I always say that people who look for seats at the table tend to find themselves in collapsible chairs. So I think that one of the things that this text also teaches us is that the people here are both miscast and stereotyped in verse number 17 and 18. Pharaoh responds to these foremen and says, "You are slackers." Says it again, slackers. That is why you were saying, "Let us go sacrifice to the Lord." Now get to work. No straw will be given you, but you must produce the same quantity of bricks. The Israelites are called lazy. Even with this reasonable request, even with the fact that now I got to go gather my own straw to make these bricks, you over here calling me lazy and a slacker. They got these stereotypes, these microaggressions that are happening from Pharaoh talking about these lazy Israelites. Again, we ain't dealing with this no more.
Yeah.
But if we were dealing with the myth of laziness and labor among black and brown people and quote unquote welfare queens and hearing language that calls us lazy, even though we're required to make bricks with straws, I wonder what the pharaohs in this culture would say to our reasonable response to say, well, look at what you're giving us to work with. And now you're calling us late. We're actually working harder than you to earn something that you got passed down from generational wealth.
One of the two things that these kinds of stereotypes do. One, it in the mind of pharaohs, it excuses their discrimination. And two, it attempts to plant a seed to question your identity. So one thing Pharaoh's doing is absolving himself of guilt. You're slackers. You're lazy. Now, they've been working 400 years with no remuneration, no pay, no benefits, nothing. They built monuments, with precision and to the degree that modern builders cannot figure out how they did what they did with the instrumentation they had at the time. And then when you take away part of the necessity of the work and they have to go find it for themselves, now that things slow down. They don't stop, they slow down because they got to go all over. One of the verses we didn't read says they have to go all over Egypt trying to find this straw. Now that they have to go find this straw for themselves and that kind of thing, now the accusation is, the mischaracterization is, you are where you are. You're not as productive as I think you should be because of a work ethic issue, not a socioeconomic oppressive system that puts you behind the eight ball in the first place. And that reality is what pharaohs continue to do. They absolve themselves. That was my ancestors. I didn't own any slave. I have not benefited from any affirmative action, that kind of thing. I've had to, I grew up poor too. Well, that's not the same as growing up black and poor. It's not. It's just not.
And this is nothing new. If I can distort the image of God in you, then I can excuse my mistreatment of you.
Yeah.
And if I can just get to a place where I don't see you as human, then I can treat you any kind of way that I want to.
Or just, you can be human, but you're just not as as human as I am. I'm not going to deny that you have some humanity, but I'm going to ascribe to you beast-like identity and behaviors, so that you then see yourself, and then I can see you as less of a human being than I am. And that's what we see. That continues to this day.
Yeah.
That's John.
And then we see these foremen actually come back and confront Moses. After they have trouble with Pharaoh, they come and confront him.
Yeah.
And Moses ultimately learns this truth that is very important for anybody who is involved doing this work and getting in some good trouble, is that he forgets that deliverance ain't easy.
Not easy.
It is not an easy, and like you said, it's a process. And he learns this early on here, as he now goes back and complains about the increased burden to God.
Yeah.
God, you sent me here to tell these people this. And look what he says. He says, verse 22, so Moses went back to the Lord and asked, Lord, why have you caused trouble for this people? And why did you ever send me? Ever since I went into Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has caused trouble for this people, and you haven't rescued your people at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now he shows up and he gets in God's face.
Look.
And he's saying, you asked me to cause good trouble, but now you causing trouble for your people. And now you've increased the burden based on the word that I said that you put in my mouth.
Yeah.
Listen, I had 10 questions for you. I wanted to disqualify myself. And now, because of what I said, your people are now seem like they're suffering and they're being oppressed.
More. More. It was bad. It's gone from bad to worse. Out of the frying pan into the fire. And God, hold on. Why is it that every time I try, and somebody feels that right now, socially, and you feel it personally, the more I try, the worse things get. And so you just, you want to stay in that safe space. You know what I mean? That safe space of the trouble, I know this joker ain't no good, so let me just stay with that. Let me just stay at this job where I'm overworking, unpaid, because every time I try to get something else, oh man, there's a rejection or something of that nature happens. It's that constant sense of feeling defeated when you put forth your best effort. And hey, man, listen, you are not alone. Moses feels that. That's exactly what he feels, Pastor John.
Yeah.
He feels like, man, God, all I did was try.
Right. This is what I get.
This is and things have gotten worse. People getting beaten. You know what I mean? They done took the straw away. And here's the last line. You haven't rescued your people at all. Can you get 10 or 15 folks out of here? Can we get a handful of folks free or something? Can I see any improvement at all? And those early efforts and that sense of pessimism that well, if I try, it's gonna get worse. If I try to communicate, they just gonna blow up on me again. Or if I try to talk to my kid about the faith, they gonna go further out in the world. Those kinds of things, that sense of feeling defeated is because we forget deliverance ain't easy.
Here's the thing that strikes me. It's almost as if Moses is like, okay, I can deal with the complaints of these people, but now the house foreman then came my way.
Yeah.
And I can't deal with the house foreman.
Yeah.
I'm using foreman, but I can't deal with the house foreman.
Yeah.
Because now he's come to me.
Yeah.
And now he's complaining.
Yeah.
I can deal with the people.
Yeah.
But now, God, you done sent this guy my way,
Yeah.
and I don't even like him.
Right.
Because he's working for the Egyptians
Right.
and oppressing us.
Right.
So now he is in this space. But here's the thing that happened, though. Moses had forgotten his initial encounter with God at the burning bush.
Yep.
Because in Exodus 3, verse number 19, he says, but I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless compelled by a mighty hand. He'd already told him
Yep.
that even though you're going to go to him with this message, and even though you are going to try to set these oppressed people free, he's not going to let that go easily.
No.
And it's going to take me to let my people go.
Yeah.
That he's not going to do that on his own accord. That it's actually going to take me and my compelling hand to help deliver my people. He has that message that he got at the burning bush.
Yeah.
But it's almost as if while he's in it,
it's hard.
It's hard to receive and to process that message because he knows for sure this is God that I encountered. Almighty and powerful God. Why is it that my initial message is met with so much more oppression for my people?
Yeah. Yeah. And whew, it is easy to forget what God told you when you are looking the devil in the eye and he looks to be winning. It's hard. And that, y'all, we feel that in spiritual spaces. We feel that in social spaces. We feel that in our personal spaces. You know, what did you say, God? And why am I doing this? I was fine on the backside of that little desert little mountain with them little with Jethro's sheep. I was doing good over there. Or at least I was comfortable or not a problem for anyone else. But God's sovereign plan is bigger than our present pain. And that reality is hard to remember when things go from bad to worse.
And that's a reminder to us that this process of deliverance, we're talking about deliverance and duty, but deliverance itself, as we see in this text and as we see in the history of our country, of black culture, as we are part of a historically black experience, is that deliverance isn't a sprint. It really is a marathon. That, as the writer of Hebrews says, that we're surrounded by this cloud of witnesses that really have demonstrated to us how to persevere through adversity. And that today, as we're experiencing just minor levels of adversity to what they experienced, I mean, they were able to put together movements in the midst of severe oppression. And for us to not be able to coalesce and put together comparable movements in a culture and society where we have a little bit more freedom as a people, it really says to that cloud of witnesses that we are a people that have more straw than you had in making bricks. And I think that we have opportunities today as believers, as people of God, to be able to remind people that this is a long process. That 2020, when we talk about the lives of Breonna Taylor and we talk about George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, that activism was spurred by folks who were really in a pandemic and really wanted to get involved. But now we have to fight apathy, which sets in years later when people feel like they may have closure. Now we have to push people towards this continued activism that's difficult.
Sustained effort toward total liberation is hard. You mentioned our foreparents, that, for them it was a lot of physical and practical violence. For us, it is more psychological and emotional. Now, there is still physical violence out there. I don't want to act like that's gone away. That still happens. We see it as a part of the ongoing experience of many people in oppressed communities. But beyond that, the psychological and emotional violence is what seems harder to put your hand on. They got video of someone's knee on someone's neck, but it's harder to see how the algorithm on my social media feed is continuing to put me in a negative mental space that is deliberate for the sake of my own oppression.
Yeah.
That the misinformation, disinformation campaigns that are prevalent, that keep me in a place of emotional and psychological instability, those kinds of things. So it's a marathon. And John, I just want to give the folks, as we close tonight, a handful of scriptures for our continued meditation, especially this week and ongoing, so that we can have fuel for the marathon. So Hebrews chapter 10, verse number 36 is the first one. I want to read these into your hearing, and then we'll close tonight. So Hebrews 10:36 says, "For you have need of endurance, so that after you have done God's will, you may receive what was promised." 1 Peter 5:10 is the second one I want to give you, just for the sake of your meditation, not a lot of explanation, but just for you to chew on and meditate. First Peter chapter 5, verse 10. "The God of all grace, who has called you to his eternal glory in Christ, will himself restore, establish, strengthen, and support you after you have suffered a little while." Last one is Romans 8:18. That's the last one, and then we'll close tonight. Romans 8:18. "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is going to be revealed to us." I want to encourage you to stay in the fight, to stay in the race, to not give in to pessimism or despair or apathy, but to endure.
Well, thank you for joining us on this episode of the Growth Factor podcast. We told y'all we're going to be getting into it this season. So we're going to continue on our next episode, but I just want to give you a couple reminders. Number one, we have a growing community on Facebook called the Growth Factor. We have over 1,000 members over there. Pastor Chris is our campus pastor over there. She's going to help shepherd you through some of these issues that we've been talking about. Also, got something special for you. We actually created a book for this particular session. That book has fill in the blanks. You can follow along with us as we move along through it. You can go over to smart.org and go into our store and pick up a copy of that book for yourself. And then finally, I want to make sure you all are aware that we're coupling this teaching with our preaching on Sundays. So make sure you go over every Sunday morning at 10 o'clock. We're virtual. We have a virtual service that you can join, and we're going to be teaching through or preaching through the book of Exodus this fall. So make sure you couple this teaching on Wednesday with Sunday morning. I promise you that you'll be blessed by it. Make sure you go over, follow our podcast on all platforms, leave us a rating and review. And then finally, make sure you share this with your community, because we do believe that as we move through these deep waters, that you will be delivered with us. Have a good day.
This has been The Growth Factor, a broadcast ministry of St. Mark Baptist Church. Be sure to follow this podcast on your favorite podcast platform and join our Facebook group, The Growth Factor, for daily motivational content. Let's keep the conversation going. Thank you for listening.